Beautiful Guyana, lush, picturesque, abundant virgin rainforests, majestic Kaito falls, vast rivers, mineral wealth, fertile agricultural lands, a country blessed with rich natural wealth. But all is not well. Heavy rainfall, falling intensely over shorter periods of time, and rising sea levels have resulted in inundation of Guyana's coastal regions adversely, impacting the lives of 75% of the population. Flooding has been a part of the history and geography of Guyana for generations. The famous seawall was constructed in 1855, following a flood in February of that year, which inundated much of Georgetown. Between 1988 and 2006, Guyana lost more than $663 million in economic damage due to floods. The year 2005 was a defining one when catastrophic floods, the worst for over 100 years, hit the coastal plain. The floods severely affected 37% of the national population, and the total economic loss was equivalent to 60% of GDP for that year. 34 persons lost their lives as a result of this flood. Starting on January 14th, some 134 centimeters or 52 inches of rain fell over 9 days, 7 times the normal amount for the country.
Well, the 2005 flood, the time I used to live in Sophia with my mother, and we used to mine like fowls, fowl and duck, and all them duck and them fowl end up dying out.
So I had to get my kids out of the area, way up in Berbice, and I can tell you, to get them out of there, I had to literally float them in a we call it a makeshift boat, using a fridge.
I had to move out because I was worried about the safety of my family with all the dirty water around. I even lost most of my furniture.
Entire villages were cut off, while some could only be reached by boats. Many villages on the coast and backlands suffered from persistent high levels of floodwaters, and some 92,000 people still had water in their homes for several weeks after the rains. Region 3, the Essequibo Islands in the West Demerara area, and Regions 4 and 5, Demerara, Mahaica, and areas in Berbice, all suffered the brunt of the damage and were declared disaster zones by the government of Guyana.
Responding to a disaster when you're not prepared for it could be a costly exercise. In 2005, we were not preparing for a major flood. But because some of us in certain sectors or subsectors were putting together programs for disaster, we were able to, in fact, respond in a manner that reduced the amount of money we needed for the response.
Why is flooding increasing? Natural, climatic, and geographic factors, together with human activity and settlement patterns, increase Guyana's vulnerability to flooding. Human activity such as deforestation, hillside agriculture, and mining in the upper watersheds of several of Guyana's rivers expose downstream settlers to flood risks. In addition, land use practices such as building over canals and poor solid waste management exacerbate flooding. Guyana is also at risk from flooding when transborder rivers overflow their banks as a result of heavy rainfall. This occurred in 2011 in the flood of Lethem, when the Branco River overflowed due to heavy rainfall in Brazil. Guyana's flood risk is therefore impacted by not only its physiography, but also by factors beyond its borders.
If you have underwater volcanoes, you can have some effects in Guyana being coastal. And if you do have, for example, in Grenada, the Kikemjeni volcano, if that ever erupts, or if there's any major activity there, you can definitely have some activity coming straight over this way. Being below the sea level, one can definitely see our coast getting some of the effects of that.
Weather systems over the past few decades have intensified. There have been marked increases in rainfall and temperature resulting from global warming and climate change. Close to 500,000 people, Georgetown and other major towns, crops and infrastructure located on the low coastal plain are critical assets at risk and are hence vulnerable to flooding from heavy rains, high tides and swells. Although more extreme weather events are expected as a result of climate change, continued destruction, loss of life, and severe economic losses are expected if the necessary measures are not put in place for flood prevention and mitigation as our country grows and develops.
These days, the seasons have become very unpredictable. The amount of rainfall that we would normally expect in a month, sometimes we're getting that over the period of a few days.
Flood risk management and climate change are clearly issues for today's generation, and Guyana is already taking action to tackle these threats. Collaborative efforts between the government, development partners such as the Inter-American Development Bank, IDB, private sector and individual citizens are being implemented to reduce flood risk and mitigate climate change. Solutions, awareness, and roles. The Civil Defense Commission, CDC, is the agency charged by the government of Guyana to coordinate a national plan to protect and prevent the people and country from the ravages of natural disasters. The CDC has been working on a comprehensive and integrated disaster risk management IDRM plan.
What the technical experts did was look at rainfall in different periods, 1, 2, 3, and even 4-day periods. And then we look also at the return period of 50, 100, 500, and 1,000 year periods. And we worked out a model to see which area will be devastated under which period. So this will give us an idea where the risk lies on the coastal zone. So we can now, in our developmental process, take this into consideration where we are planning development. So we're taking the message to the general public in Guyana, and we are focusing a little more on the school.
Taking responsibility is an important part of the disaster risk management plan, and everyone has a role to play to guarantee its success. Coastline protection, one aspect of the Guyana Mangrove Restoration Project, is an ongoing initiative to protect sections of the coastline from flooding.
We would have seen through project intervention the natural regeneration and restoration of mangroves. So what this is helping to do in communities such as Wellington Park and village number 8 in West Coast Berbice is that flooding that the communities would have seen happening before the project intervention and before where there were no mangroves, you have less flooding.
The careful monitoring of changing weather patterns and the introduction of the international warning system is another important aspect of taking responsibility.
Every country that monitors their own area, that data is sent to the global telecommunication system. And that information is transmitted back to our forecasters as the National Weather Watch Center. They then analyze it and then they would issue forecasts based on what the model output is.
With abundant agricultural lands, Guyana can be considered the breadbasket of the Caribbean, and ensuring food security is critical.
One of the big problems that we face is with livestock. During flooding season, there is no place to put your livestock. And so the Ministry of Agriculture has been working with farmers to build mounds so that when there are floods, the animals have a place to go. We're also teaching the farmers to keep reserves of food. These cash crop farmers, we're teaching them to grow their crops on mounds, so lift it off the ground, so that if there is flood, the plants are still protected.
Guyana has become a global leader in setting the pace with its comprehensive program to reduce greenhouse gases.
In November of 2009, Guyana entered into a partnership with the Kingdom of Norway. Under that partnership, Guyana would earn up to $250 million over a period of 5 years if we are able to maintain low levels of deforestation and to keep our forests intact.
The success of any disaster risk management plan will depend on the joint efforts of communities to reduce the risk of flooding through efforts such as cleaning drains, disposing of garbage safely, building in safe zones, and following building codes. The recent experience of flooding in Guyana has shown us that drains are blocked and overflowing with garbage and plastics indiscriminately thrown into them by you and me. This prevents water from flowing through the trenches, and instead it backs up, flooding our homes, schools, playgrounds, and offices. When this happens, we are all affected. All suffer losses, and our health is threatened. The canals and cocas are critical in the drainage and flood control system, and hence it is the civic duty of all Guyanese to play their part in maintaining these systems. By not throwing garbage on the roadside through minibus and car windows, we could reverse some of the negative effects of flooding. Guyana is vulnerable to flooding, and the extremes of today may become the norms of tomorrow. We must all accept our flood risk and be prepared to reduce or mitigate them. Now is the time for the entire nation to own the solutions for a safer Guyana. Take responsibility, and let us ensure the safety of our children, our families, our communities, and ultimately, our country, Guyana.